Well, welcome back. We've been studying the structures that are found inside the cell, and this segment is dedicated to the cell membrane. We're going to start on the outside and then work our way in. And as you can see, the cell membrane is the barrier that separates the cell from the external environment. In order for the chemistry of life to go on uninterrupted, there need to be protections that are afforded the cell so that life can go on. Just like in your home, in order for the business of your family life to go on uninterrupted, you need protections that are in place as well. And so the cell membrane provides those kinds of protections for the cell. So let's focus on those for a few minutes, shall we? Now, as I said, there's two major functions that are provided to the cell by its cell membrane. First, as I said, is that it provides a boundary between the inside and the outside of the cell. Secondly, it allows for the controlled passage of particular materials that cells are going to need. Things like food, nutrients, oxygen. Wastes are going to have to go outside of the cell. And let's take a look now at some of the parts of which the cell membrane is made and make sense of those. Now, phospholipid comes from two words that are joined together. There's a phosphate molecule joined to a lipid molecule, a fat. If you recall, fats are nonpolar. We'll drill down and take a look at one of those right now. In this molecule right here, there is a structure that has a phosphate ion attached to two long tails here. That's the lipid part. Now, phosphates have a charge on them, and as I said a moment ago, this lipid tail is nonpolar. And so nonpolar structures are going to interact with other nonpolar structures. And phosphates, because they have a charge, they can interact very easily with water. And so the phospholipid bilayer is going to arrange itself so that all the tails are facing the inside of the layer, and those that are more what we call hydrophilic or water-loving are going to be directed toward the outside and the inside of the cell that you see here. Now, there's other structures here that we want to pay attention to as well. As you can see, there are these brown structures that we have illustrated for us, and these are the proteins that are embedded into the cell. And you can see that these have carbohydrate structures that are attached to them. And these form kind of the function for you that a license plate is going to have to a car. They're going to uniquely identify what type of cell this is. And of course, cells need to know which other cells are friend and which are foe so they can protect themselves. Well, that's kind of the function that these are going to provide, as well as other signaling functions. And there's other proteins. If we'll move down here, we can see proteins that are referred to as channel proteins. And you can see they're like tubes that are embedded into the cell membrane. But keep in mind, these are going to be kind of intelligent proteins because they're not just going to allow the passage of any type of molecule through the cell. They're going to be very specialized in what kinds of molecules are allowed passage into this very important environment where life is taking place. There's also other proteins here that perform important signaling functions, which we'll get into in a moment. And you can see underneath there are these microfilaments that are going to be attached to other structures within the cell. And so the cell has some kind of control over the type of shape that that membrane takes around the cell. Now, collectively, we refer to this as the fluid mosaic model of the cell. Fluid because these structures are not glued together so that they can never move. I want you to imagine a swimming pool that's covered by ping pong balls. And if you were to toss in a basketball or a volleyball right in the middle of that, they're going to move aside to give room to the basketball. Well, it's kind of like these structures here. There is something of an ability to move around one another. And so some of these structures that you see embedded in the cell membrane, they can shift position to some extent. We refer to that as a mosaic because it's made up of many, many individual parts that kind of work together as a whole. All right, so in a nutshell, this is basically the structure that provides the protections that every one of your cells and other living things, that which they need. All right, now let's go on to the functioning of this cell membrane. As we said a little while ago, it's selectively permeable. In other words, because the cell membrane is permeable, that means it allows the passage of some kind of molecules. When we use the word selectively here, we're saying that the cell membrane itself gets to decide what allows passage from one side of the membrane to the other, such as these water molecules. The other molecules that you see pictured here in red, they're not allowed passage because they don't meet the conditions that are set by the cell membrane. And it is very specific on what it's going to allow in and what it's going to allow out of the cell. Now, let's move on to some of the signaling functions that we see very briefly. And these are made up of receptors and also ligands. And if you remember our previous study of enzymes, they function in a similar way to the active sites on enzymes. All right, take a look at this diagram that you see here. We have something known as an intercellular receptor. And so a ligand or a particle that's going to interact with the receptor is going to be permitted to cross the membrane where it binds to a receptor in order for communication to take place, and then another process is set in motion. So the cell is able to monitor what's going on outside. There's also another type of receptor that we're referencing here that's embedded right into the membrane itself. And so here, the ligand, which is going to be the molecule that's going to be monitored here, that's never going to enter the cell. But what it's going to do is it's going to bind to an active site on a protein that's embedded into the cell membrane itself, what we're referring to here as the receptor. And therefore, this is going to change shape, and it's going to bind to or release another protein that's inside the cell. And so that communication is made through the cell membrane without anything even passing through the membrane. Well, that's a basic introduction to some of the important structures of the cell membrane. So I appreciate your comments below, and if you thought this video was helpful, please give me, a good old thumbs up. Listen, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.